All right, Thursday afternoon. I'm sorry, it's taking me a long time to get these things together. And I'm very sorry about the confusion over dates for the first paper. I'm not even sure how the October 5th date got in there, but it did. I did try to rectify it by posting the due dates and then an announcement that said it was the 14th in big print. If you handed in a paper because you were concerned that it might be the October 5th deadline, if it was a perfect paper, you're happy with it, fine. I'll be grading it soon, I guess. But if you felt like you were rushed or something like that, you can use you can take the extra time, and I believe you can resubmit it. But if you do that, please note on the title page that it's your this is the the definitive edition, or this is the one to be graded, something like that. All right. Today we're going to talk about part of chapter 19, which is From Crisis to Empire. In earlier editions of this textbook, the Spanish-American War and Imperialism got its separate chapter, and Populism and this stalemate in politics got a separate chapter, and then at some point they just jam them together. So it's a giant chapter, really. I mainly want to talk about populism today. There is an interesting section on how the politics, we're in a two-party system, Democrats and Republicans right now. This is the third-party system. Historians and political scientists will talk about stages of American politics, and this is the third system. Okay, I guess it began in 1860 when Lincoln gets elected. The Republican Party at that time is a new party, started in the 1850s, and it's the last successful third party, the Republican Party. And it basically drives out the Whigs, who were incapable of dealing with the issue of slavery one way or another. And so that party falls apart and disappears, and you get Republicans and Democrats. By the late 19th century, these two parties are kind of locked. They are... There's a bunch of states that are reliably Democratic, a bunch of states that are reliably Republican, not unlike today, and a bunch of swing states that more or less determine the elections. The presidency goes more for the Republicans, but the margin of victory, the popular vote margin of victory for the presidency is on average like 1.5%. So the popular vote is kind of mixed really tightly. The Senate is in the hands of the Republicans, I think, and the House of Representatives is in the hands of the Democrats. There are some other parts of that I'm not going to go into. There's some stories about the presidents in the late 19th century, many of whom are least well-known presidents. I've had classes that had no idea there was a president named Chester Arthur. If you're out there and that's the first time you've heard of Chester Arthur, you can raise your hand. I won't see it, but I know there's a few of you. Garfield, Cleveland, Harrison. Talk about the tariffs and stuff like that. You can read about all of this stuff. One fun thing is a guy named James Blaine is running for president. I'm not even sure which year it is, but he he visits with a bunch of Protestant ministers, I think it is, or supporters. I guess they're Republicans. I'm not sure. And one of the ministers or one of the visitors says something about the Democrats being the party of rum, Romanism, and rebellion. And it's kind of funny, I think. Rum is there. The Democrats basically were against prohibition because a lot of their supporters were immigrant Irish and German people, and drinking is part of their culture. Romanism is a sort of a slur on the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church. And rebellion is, because the Democrats did have most Catholic immigrants were in the Democratic Party. And rebellion is the Democrats were the party that backed the Confederacy, basically. But when the word gets out that he doesn't say anything about that, the Catholic vote moves, I think, for Cleveland, and Cleveland wins in a big upset. But I mention it because it comes up all the time. Whenever a modern day politician says something that costs them votes, somebody will always harken back to this Romanism and rebellion thing. But I really want to start with the agrarian revolt, okay? We talked in chapter 17 about industrial supremacy. One of the meanings was industry is becoming much more important than agriculture in the country. And farmers are feeling that. Farmers are feeling that even before, the 1920 census, which is seen as the turning point. Political power is going to where the population is in the cities, and the intellectual leadership of the country is in the cities. The artistic, advances are in the city. And most farmers are living a pretty harsh life. The Homestead Act gives out these 160 acre or 62 acre plots. And so you have all these people like scattered across, the landscape in South Dakota or someplace like that. And the summers are brutally hot, and the winters are incredibly cold and foul-weathered. And for months in the winter, you might be stuck in a cabin or a sod hut, which is made out of dirt, with just your family. And they're at the mercy of railroads and people that warehouse crops and stuff like that. And they have no control over crop prices. And they're in a hard way materially, economically, and they're also in a hard way spiritually or culturally. Their lives are not that great. There are three organizations that get started. The Grange is an organization that's started to introduce agricultural improvements, all right, to make apply scientific knowledge to agriculture so that you are more efficient and grow better food. But very shortly after its founding, there's a depression in 1873 that increases its membership and sort of changes the direction where they're starting to look for political solutions to their problems. And one of the solutions is to gain control of state governments, state legislatures, and to pass laws that regulate the railroads. And they're called the Granger Laws of the 1870s. States impose strict regulations on railroad rates and practices. But there's a clause in the Constitution that says only the federal government, Congress essentially, can regulate interstate commerce. Okay? Commerce that goes from one state to another. And almost by definition, railroads are interstate commerce. Okay? A railroad that goes from, Illinois to Kansas to Colorado is interstate. And in fact, you wouldn't want railroads that only stayed in the state. So these laws all get struck down, okay? And that kind of pushes people in it's like, oh, if controlling the state legislature isn't enough, then we have to go to the federal level. They next try forming these things called the Farmers' Alliances. And it says by 1880, the Southern Alliance had more than 4 million members. A similar Northwestern Alliance was taking root in the Plain States and the Midwest, largely replacing the Grange. All right? Now they have some big plans to change the economy, to set up cooperatives, where farmers themselves are sort of warehousing stuff and doing things like that. But they have problems in that they're farmers. They're not administrators. They're not business managers. They're not capitalists, really. They're like small businessmen farmers. And it makes for a problem. There's a merger of the Southern and Northwestern Alliance in 1889. The next year they have a national convention at Ocala, Florida. And they issue something called the Ocala Demands, which were essentially a party platform. Now, I don't know if they cover this in those pig courses, but a party platform is the issues and the stands of a particular party on a number of different issues. And the individual issues are called planks in the platform. I don't know where it comes from, but that's the language that we use, okay? Now in 1890, there's an election that's not a presidential election. We called it an off-year election. And if you're starting a political movement, the off-year elections, well, this is 2020 is a presidential election year, right? I hope you're all registered to vote, and I hope you all vote. 2022 will be an off year. We're not voting for a president in 2022. We are voting for the House of Representatives, and we are voting for a third of the Senate. Third of the members of the Senate will be reelected. So there's less turnout in an off year election, and so if you're pretty well organized in your group, you could have a greater impact in those elections. So anyway, the alliances do pretty well in 1890. I'm not going to read all the details. You can read them. I don't know which edition you have. I'm on page 450 here. They won 6 governorships, 3 seats in the U.S. Senate, and approximately 50 in the the U.S. House of Representatives, and then did fabulously in the state legislatures. Okay? So they made plans then to hold meetings in Cincinnati in May 1891, St. Louis in February 1892, and July 1892, 1,300 delegates poured into Omaha, Nebraska, to create this a new third party. Okay. They're going to create a new party. They're going to approve an official set of principles and nominate candidates for the presidency and vice presidency. 1892 is a presidential year. The organization's official name was the People's Party, but the movement was more commonly referred to as populism. Now that's populism with a capital P. Right? There are there are other movements that are called a populist movement that have certain characteristics. I think people would call Bernie Sanders campaigns sort of populist with a small p. You can have right or left populism. It has a number of. I'm losing all my light bulbs here. It has a number of characteristics that I'm not going to go into, but this is the People's Party, okay? And what's interesting is they create a third party. Now there have been, in the 20th century, there have been loads of third parties. Roosevelt creates one in 1912. 1968, a guy named George Wallace, who's a segregationist, sets up his own party. In 92 and 96, a guy named H. Ross Perot has a third party that's sort of responsible or helps to get Clinton elected twice. In 1948, there's actually three parties just within the Democratic camp. There's the Democratic Party, there's a Progressive Party, which is on the left, and then there's a Dixiecrat Party that has another name. I can't remember what its other name is. They're sort of the segregationist party. In 1948, the Democrats introduced a civil rights plank in their platform, and all these Southern segregationists split the party, okay? Now what's different about the People's Party here, populism here, is that all those other third parties are basically a vehicle to elect a certain person president. But the People's Party is not. It grows out of concerns that people have, and then they choose somebody to run for president. Okay. I'm going to skip over the populist constituency, not because it's unimportant, but because I don't have a lot of time. And the section on populist ideas is pretty interesting. There are a bunch of ideas in here that eventually become part of American politics, but not because of the populists, because of later movements, usually the progressives in the early part of the 20th century. But there's some interesting ideas in there. So you have this, they do fairly well in 1892. They don't get the president elected, of course. That's a difficult thing. But they get senators, some governors. They can claim the support of various Republicans and Democrats in Congress who got elected because of the populists, with the support of the populists. And they're looking forward, obviously, to 1896, right? But then you get another depression, okay? Capitalism sort of creates these depressions until recently, until the Great Depression. It was just allowed, the economic system is just allowed to do what it did, and there would be a periodic depression, and there's one in 1893, okay? You can read those details. A couple of railroads and the National Cordage Company declare bankruptcy, and it sends the stock market into a tailspin, and next thing you know, there's tremendous amounts of unemployment. And people get worked up in depressions. They do. They start asking for help from the government. And in 1893, the government has no, just has no sense that they should help. Even in the 30s, under Hoover, when the Depression hits in 1929, he doesn't really know what to do, and the traditional strategy is just to sort of hunker down and wait it out, which doesn't work in 1929. Now there's a thing that comes up, and this is part of how one of the ways that third parties sort of fail, okay? There are kind of structural factors that make it impossible almost for a third party to succeed. The Republicans were the last third party that succeeded, and they only succeeded because the issue of slavery overrode the structural limitations. It's really sort of built into the structure that there'd be two parties, even though the Constitution doesn't mention parties, and just the way we elect things, the Electoral College and single-member districts and some other things that are technical, makes it hard for a third party. But one of the things that comes up is something called the silver question. It's pretty confusing. It took me a few years to understand it. But how it works is this. For most of its history, the United States recognized both gold and silver as a basis for the dollar. Okay, in the 1870s, that changed. The official ratio of the value of silver to the value of gold for the purposes of creating currency, which is also known as the mint ratio, was 16-1. 16 ounces of silver equaled 1 ounce of gold. Got that? 16 ounces of silver equaled 1 ounce of gold. Now, I don't know how you can have an official rate when you live in a world where gold could be discovered in the Yukon, silver could be discovered in Nevada, and the supply of gold and silver changes rapidly, and 16-1 might have been okay one day, but 3 months later it's something else, 10-1 or 20-1. I don't know how you can have. You can look in the newspaper and see the price of gold fluctuate day by day by day. Okay, which has more to do with buying and selling than the actual supply of gold. But in this period of time, it's the supply of gold that creates the difference. So you had a ratio of 16-1. But the actual commercial value of silver was much higher than that. Okay, so outside of the mint ratio, you could get an ounce of gold for 10 ounces of silver. So who would bring it to the mint where they're asking for 16, nobody. So people stopped taking it to the mint, and the mint stopped coining silver. Right? Sure. And then Congress does something, I don't even understand why they would do this. They passed a law that basically said it made that situation sort of permanent. It said it officially discontinued silver coinage. Nobody really complained at the time, but later the market value of silver fell below the 16-to-1 ratio. Okay, so now people in the outside of the mint want 20 ounces of silver for an ounce of gold. And people want to resurrect that 16-to-1 because it's beneficial for them. But then they come up against this law that Congress passed discontinuing silver. And Americans love a conspiracy, so people start to conspire about the conspiracy to discontinue silver. And they come up with big bankers had been responsible, or I don't know, probably some people thought it was the Jews. Who knows? Americans have no lack of talent for creating conspiracies. So now it becomes a political issue, all right? People are calling it the crime of 73, this act of Congress that passed the discontinued silver. And there's all these farmers that want to inflate the currency, calling for the monetization or the coining of silver to increase the money supply so that they'll get better prices for their farm goods and it will be easier to pay their debts, all right, if there's a larger money supply. Some of this is hard to understand because today we don't have a system like this. The dollar that you have in your pocket is not backed by gold or silver someplace. It's backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government, which isn't nothing, but it's also not, it's kind of abstract. It's an abstract quantity. Okay. This creates a kind of, what do you call it? This becomes a thing. The other thing that Americans are famous for, besides conspiracies, is deciding that a single political action will cure everything. Okay, there's a Greek word for that, panacea. A panacea is something that will cure like almost all our ills, right? And there have been a lot of them. This coining of silver, or what comes down as the slogan "free silver," is one of them. If we coin silver, it'll be easier to pay debts. Farmers will be prosperous because they're getting big prices for their crops, and business activity will be energized and all this kind of thing, right? Some others are, I've had people in this day and age, maybe 10, 15 years ago, that hemp, like legalizing hemp and using it for, fuel your cars and breakfast cereal, hemp would be a cure-all, okay? Sometimes you see people on these political shows, they'll pull out what's like a large index card and say, this is your flat tax return, okay? And they think the flat taxes will cure everything, right? Everybody pays 15% of their income, and there are no deductions, and there's no. And you can do it all on a big index card. And might cure some of those things. Even prohibition was thought to be this a kind of panacea. Prohibition was expected to the people that pushed for it in the like 20s, no alcohol. The people that pushed for it thought it would end domestic violence because guys only beat their wives when they're drunk. Reduce industrial accidents, help with absenteeism at work, make workers more productive and more efficient. It would be good for the morality of the country and all sorts of things, okay? The only problem is they they didn't realize they were dealing with Americans. And you have to do more than just pass a law if you want Americans to do something, or not to do something in this case. So we come into the 1896 election. The populists have all these ideas, but free silver is dominating. Okay, this issue of silver has become like, you know, I don't know. It's become like healthcare. All right. The Republicans nominate William McKinley, who's the governor of Ohio, and the Democrats meet in convention, and they're kind of very split. There are Southern and Western Democrats that want to sort of compete with the populists. They want to add some populist ideas to the platform. And then there's a sort of conservative Northeast bunch of Democrats that want, you know, the old same stuff. Okay? So the two sides of the argument are the gold standard, which the Republicans have already adopted, and free silver. And so there are Democrats on both sides of that. It looks like the gold standard people are going to win. And then there's a scene where at the convention. William Jennings Bryan, I think he came up on Jeopardy last night or the night before. I love these little descriptions. It says, a handsome 36-year-old congressman from Nebraska. He gives a speech that's become famous. It's called the Cross of Gold speech. And sometimes if I'm in a classroom, I might like get loud and act it out. But I'm not going to do that today. You have to think, there's like, I don't know where this convention is, but it's got to be in some kind of giant room or, you know, place. And there's no electricity. There's no sound system. You know, maybe he's got a megaphone to yell through. But you have to talk really loud if you're going to be heard by, you know, I don't know, 1,800 people, 2,000, 3,000 people. It's a very famous speech. He says, having behind us the producing masses of this nation and the world, supported by the commercial interests, the laboring interests, and the toilers everywhere, we will answer their demand for a gold standard by saying to them, you shall not press down upon the brow of labor this crown of thorns. You shall not crucify mankind on a cross of gold. And I love it because you shall not press down upon the brow of labor this crown of thorns. Where is that from? It's from the Passion of Christ in the Bible, okay? The crown of thorns. And you shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold. Again, that's the end of the Passion. So he's talking about being against the gold standard, but he's using Christian imagery to push it through. Right? Bryan is nominated for president at this point by these, enthusiastic Democrats. And he'll go on to lose the election. But it puts the populace in a really crummy position. And this is one of the things that can happen with a third party. They could nominate their own person, say this Charles Weaver that they've been running, James Weaver, I don't know what his name is, but that's going to split the free silver vote, and that'll help the Republicans win. And then really their only choice is to also support the Democratic candidate, William Jennings Bryan. But that's going to lead to their party sort of being diminished. And in fact, it disappears after the election. Okay? I think this is called co-optation. And it's a key to how third parties work. In the two elections in the 90s, Ross Perot was the third party. He was kind of a right-wing guy, and so he stole votes, or he took votes from George H.W. Bush in 92 and allowed Clinton to win with less than 50% of the vote. And then in 96, he took votes from Bob Dole, and allowed him to win. Similar things would happen if you had a third party that was on the left. In 2000, a lot of people seem to think that the Green Party with Ralph Nader took enough votes away from Gore to cost him that election. Okay, so that's one of the ways that third parties work. In the election itself, McKinley campaigns in the old style, which is basically he stays at home and people come and visit him. They drink lemonade and smoke cigars, and they pledge their support. Party leaders pledge their support, and then they go home. Bryan gets on a train and goes all around the country. It's like the first modern campaign where he's trying to talk to just about every American. Okay. It doesn't do him any good. On election day, McKinley had 271 electoral votes to Bryan's 176. So he loses the election. They have these throughout the book. They have these maps of elections, and I think they're pretty interesting. They're worth looking at sometimes. One of the most interesting things is the South is always Democratic. The South down here is almost always Democratic until you get to about 1980, and then it starts to flip to Republican, slowly but surely. Okay. McKinley makes out like a bandit because shortly after he gets elected, the economy recovers. There's a big strike of gold, I think, in Canada, in the Yukon, and you get much more inflation of the money supply than you would have with just free silver. So even though he's a gold standard guy, so the discovery of lots and lots of gold sort of makes him. He solves the problem that the populists were trying to solve. I'm getting confused now. So that's it, I think. I'll try. Probably Saturday. I will get the Spanish-American War. Get to the Spanish-American War. I think the next chapter is the progressives. I'm going to give that very. Don't worry too much about that. And then it's on to World War I and the 20s, and I think we're on schedule to actually get to close to modern times. I do have a what would I call it? A treat? I don't know if it's a treat, but a friend of mine who was in Vietnam, I think in 1969, has agreed to do one of these, a little videotape for us that I will be posting at some point a little further down the line. He was 19 when he went over there. He was kind of a gung-ho guy, I think. I'll let him tell the story, but he's seen, he wasn't a military policeman. He wasn't somebody busting up gambling houses in Saigon. He was out in the field. So, and we talked a while ago about him coming up to lecture, which he was willing to do. But I think this will work much better. He'll just send me a video, and we'll take it from there. So, all right. Have a good afternoon. And again, I'm sorry about confusion about dates. I'll let you in a little secret. I don't really care about deadlines. What's up? All right. Bye-bye.